decide whether we are going to freedom tomorrow or we are postponing that freedom for later dates. This conference is going to decide such questions.
There will be a very clear and unmistakable voice from this conference about the future.
Well, the conference has still got a lot of work to do. It did not convene just to elect a leadership.
On behalf of the three regions of the African National Congress in the province of Natal, I welcome you all to this historic conference of the African National Congress.
This is a historic conference. Your conference will be scrutinized and observed throughout the country and indeed throughout the world. I am now about to call upon the President General of the African National Congress, Oliver Tambo.
Greatest historical failures of our times has been the inability of the successive white regimes to halt our struggle. Even at the most difficult times, our people never surrendered. As a result, despite all the schemes aimed at destroying our movement, we grew both in stature and effectiveness. Our survival and growth as a fighting force is a major victory that our people have scored under difficult conditions of illegality. We proceeded to call upon our people to make South Africa ungovernable and apartheid unworkable. To this call, our people responded in their thousands, everywhere in the country. Our people's confidence in their ability to defeat the regime was restored by the daring armed actions of Umkhonto we. With the dynamic growth of the UDF and COSATU, we reached the point where our four main pillars of struggle posed the most serious challenge to white minority rule ever since in our country. Operating within the logic of the people's struggle, we managed to push the enemy into crisis which could not be resolved within the confines of the old order. Before I sit down, I wish to make a few observations. We did not tear ourselves apart because of lack of progress at times. We're always ready to accept our mistakes and to correct them. Above all, we succeeded to foster and defend the unity of the ANC and the unity of our people in general. Even in bleak moments, we were never in doubt regarding the winning of freedom. We have never been in doubt that the people's cause shall triumph. Amanda! 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 I would like to join our President, Comrade Oliver Tambo, in welcoming you all to this conference. It is an incontestable fact that the millions of our people and many more internationally are looking forward to the results of this conference in the expectation that at the end we will convey to them all a message of hope that the long days of apartheid tyranny are about to end. We shall not, through our own acts of omission or commission, disappoint these expectations by reducing the conference just to another event in the political calendar of our country. The week ahead of us is therefore very important. We expect of all of us rational and constructive debate. Out of that debate must come equally rational, constructive, and realistic decisions aimed at taking South Africa forward as quickly as possible to its destination as a united, democratic, non-racial, and non-sexist country. Through the struggles of our people, the ANC has been unburned, and we are able to meet in our own country today. The ability to conduct struggle is gained in struggle. The ability to score victories is a function of experience that we gain in struggle. Experience also means mistakes and failures. It is by learning from this that we are able to struggle in a better way. Fear of mistakes and failures means only one thing. It means fear of engaging in struggle. As a result of the struggle that we waged for decades, the balance of forces has changed to such an extent that the ruling National Party, which thought it could maintain the system of white minority domination forever, has been obliged to accept the fact that it has no strength to sustain the apartheid system and that it must enter into negotiations with the genuine representatives of the people. Negotiations constitute a victory of our struggle and a defeat for the ruling group, which thought it could exercise a monopoly of political power forever. We are very conscious that the process could not be smooth, since we are dealing with a regime that is steeped in a culture of racism, violence, and domination. We are dealing with a group of politicians who do not want to negotiate themselves out of power, and representatives of the state who fear the impact of democratic change. The point which must be clearly understood is that the struggle is not over, and negotiations themselves are a theater of struggle. They are a theater of struggle, subject to advances and reverses as any other form of struggle. Despite our own heroic efforts, we have not defeated the regime. Consequently, we see negotiations as a continuation of the struggle leading to our central objective, the transfer of power to the people.
This meeting between the ANC and the government at Groteskeur in May 1990 marked the beginning of the process of talks about talks. As a result of this process, some political prisoners have been released, exiles returned home, and some apartheid laws have been repealed. At conference, the Negotiations Commission discussed the process since then and the way forward regarding negotiations.
We have shared the National Party has put forward the idea also of a multi-party conference. I think there is general agreement, excluding, of course, organizations like the Conservative Party and so on, that such a, what we called an all-party congress should take place. Therefore, it would seem, comrades, that as part of the process, we will discuss among ourselves the issue of the obstacles and what we need to say about them. But I think it would be necessary to say the obstacles having been removed, are there any guidelines that we can agree that would help the movement when it does come to the point of the convening of such an all-party congress?
And I want to propose, Comrade Chair, that before we look at the structures, the agenda of the all-party congress, the Constituent Assembly, that we start with an assessment of the negotiations process, how far it's gone, and how it fits with the struggles that we are fighting on other levels. I think that's an important starting point. I think after we've done that, it will then be important to look at the process and take the process step by step. We look at how the obstacles are going to be removed. We look at the all-party Congress, what should be the agenda. We looked at the question of the interim government and the Constitution. I propose that we deal with the issue in that manner. And I think in that way, we'll have a fruitful discussion in this commission. Thank you, Comrade Chair.
There have been complaints, you see, in the other areas that headquarters is monopolizing the process of negotiations. But I think if we have this core at headquarters, this core at headquarters must have dynamic contact with the regions and perhaps through the regions with the branches on the question of negotiation, so that we're not seen to be doing this thing alone at HQ here. I think negotiations itself is an art. Now I wonder whether we've worked out the concept of negotiations in the detail. And I think that we need a small team, small think tank, to work on the question of negotiations, to find out exactly where we are, what we're doing, what are the problems, what is likely to happen, to anticipate what is likely to happen, and our countermeasures.
Since we have entered the talks of talks, we can see clearly that the clerk has been dictating the terms, that we haven't been able to talk from a position of strength. And I think even if you look at the issue of the violence and what effect that has had on our organizations, it is clear that that has weakened the ANC. And I think it's important, if we are so serious that we must negotiate from a position of strength, if we are so serious that we want to negotiate the transfer of power, we have to make an assessment of how strong we were, what we have achieved. And I think we also need to be clear that the clerk is not serious about transferring power. In fact, we have to take power from him. Thank you, Comrade Chair.
The consultative conference gave the National Executive a mandate to pursue talks about talks by setting up certain mechanisms. Immediately after conference, the NEC met, took decisions about the composition of those mechanisms, and failed to carry them through consciously on the basis that we were heading for this present conference. I'm saying this not destructively, comrades. I'm saying this constructively for the incoming National Executive. We would not like to meet again at conferences to find that decisions of conferences are so lightly overlooked. Secondly, comrades, from the point of view of strategy, we have not yet developed an adequate strategy and a set of tactics to combine mass action with the pursuit of negotiations. We therefore have to address that question in a positive way to say how we think we should achieve those targets through united mass action and pursuing negotiations. Thank you.
I want to put the position that we're accepting that it is a possibility even right now as we are sitting here to achieve the transfer of power into the hands of the people through a process of negotiations. That secondly, this negotiations is one form of struggle that must be fully supported by mass action. Thirdly, that we have not yet reached a position in which we have removed the obstacles to negotiations. But having removed the obstacles to negotiations, it nevertheless remains for us at conference now, I think, to discuss a number of issues. And we've got to discuss them in the Commission at some point. What about this all-party conference? Who is going to convene it? Should the people from the tricameral parliament be a part of this all-party conference? Do we stick to our regional positions that the all-party conference should only discuss the modalities of a new constitution?
We need to develop much more creative approaches to mass actions. If we look at the last 6 months, I think what that's taught us is that it's actually got particularly workers quite uptight about the fact that every 3 weeks there's a march or a stay away or something on the go with very little consultation and the like. And in fact, that's been very divisive for us and is something the regime has used, and it certainly hasn't advanced us in building a much stronger organization as a fighting force around negotiations. We need a coherent negotiation strategy, because that's something that the regime is being able to divide us on many fronts. We focused here purely at a national level of negotiations, but look at what's happening at the local level, where in the Transvaal you have a Soweto People's Delegation, Alexandra Civic, CAST, etc., all quite confused about what that local negotiation strategy should be. And so that a variety of those sorts of conflicts come in which have to do with that negotiations process. And the fifth and final thing is, what is the role of the ANC? It seems that that's often quite undefined. We often use these terms like the ANC in conjunction with its partners, etc. But what is our role as the ANC vis-a-vis negotiations?
The Commission could not complete its work within the time allocated. A draft resolution on negotiations was presented at plenary for delegates to discuss and adopt.
We feel that as a Commission, we did not complete the work that was placed before us. And because we could not complete the work of this important commission, there was a suggestion that a national consultative conference dealing specifically with negotiations be convened by the new NEC. Consequently, it was not possible to bring together all the issues and suggestions raised to formulate a resolution on these questions. For this reason, it was possible only to formulate a draft resolution which reflects a general strategic approach as well as mechanisms for proper consultation within the movement and within the tripartite alliance.
We use here the term endorses the negotiations strategy, which suggests that negotiations is a strategy. I would like to amend this to read endorses the strategy for negotiations, because there is increasingly a feeling that negotiations has displaced other forms of struggle.
Comrade Chair.
Yes, Comrade.
On this paragraph 6, as a part which says, which talks about obstacles to negotiation. But now I feel that, to me, it sounds vague, Comrade, in that it does not specify which obstacles. Comrade Chair, at this point in time, Comrade, we've got, for instance, a document circulated from the political prisoners. I think that is an issue of great concern, Comrade. And I feel that this whole document is very silent on that, Comrade. We just assume that the international community, for instance, and everybody in the country knows which are those obstacles. Thank you, Comrade Chair.
The declarations, including the UN declaration, spell out these obstacles: political prisoners, political trials, state of emergency, and so on. And that's a document adopted by the international community. International community is not in the least unfamiliar with what these obstacles are.
Comrade Chair, I would like to continue on where the last speaker has ended.
Yes.
When we speak about obstacles, I would agree with you that the Harare Declaration actually specifies these obstacles, but we as a movement, we have added another obstacle, which is the question of violence. I still believe that we need to specify in these resolutions which obstacles we're referring to, because this is a policy document which is going to be circulated amongst our members and through the international community. Thank you.
I propose that section, because apartheid is by definition a violent system, and that therefore for as long as apartheid is in place, for so long will we contend with the issue of violence. I therefore suggest that we cannot, that our fight is precisely against apartheid, against violence, and that if we use negotiations in that fight, as we are saying we do, that we cannot therefore see violence as an obstacle. The removal of violence is the objective of our fight.
I sympathize, Comrade, with the point that you are making, but we're dealing with a specific historical context where the the launching of this campaign of terror against the people here in the Transvaal and elsewhere, we have in fact said has constituted an additional obstacle to negotiations, and that unless the matter was effectively addressed, we would not in fact proceed with any discussions around the Constitution.
On behalf of the Organization of African Unity, of which I am current chairman, on behalf of the government and people of Nigeria, and in my own name, I bring you fraternal greetings on this historic occasion of the first Congress of the ANC holding in Durban. It is the wish and hope of Africa, the wish and hope of the Nigerian people and government that concrete measures will be adopted to facilitate the establishment of a new order and society in South Africa.
For us, Soviets who are here, representing a Communist Party, representing Soviet Solidarity Committee, this is a day of great joy. But this is a day of sorrow as well, because among the many faces here, we can't see the faces of our good old comrades, those who were killed in actions, those who were assassinated, those whose hearts were broken on their way home. And once again, we are bowing our head in their memory. And finally, comrades, the Soviet people, year after year, decade after decade, done everything possible and maybe even something impossible to contribute to the liberation process in this country, in this part of the world. And we are sure that soon the day will come for full-scale, all-around cooperation between the Soviet Union, renovated Soviet Union, and the future free South Africa. Thank you, comrades.
Maxine Waters, and I am a democratically elected member of the Congress of the United States of America. 27 of us, representing hundreds of thousands of supporters, traveled from the United States to be with you this week to bring our love and our uncompromising support for your courageous struggle for justice and freedom in South Africa.
Compañero Oliver Tambo, compañero Nelson Mandela, compañeros de la dirección de la ANC, compañeros delegados e invitados.
Dear Comrade Tambo, dear Comrade Mandela, dear comrades of the leadership of the ANC, dear comrades all, we bring here today the greetings and best wishes of the Communist Party of Cuba, of the entire people of Cuba, and of Comrade Fidel Castro, to the glorious, hard-fighting, and impregnable African National Congress, the ANC, that initiated, led, and will continue to lead on to victory the struggle against apartheid. We can assure you, comrades of the ANC, that Cuba will not fail. The banners of socialism in my country will never be lowered.
del Comité Central del Partido Comunista de Cuba,
on behalf of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Cuba, we present to the leadership of the ANC that banner which will never be lowered.
The movement's policy of non-sexism was put to the test when delegates from the Women's League put forward a resolution calling for 30% representation of women in all elected ANC structures.
Historically, as we all know, women have always been very, very far behind the men folk. There's always been this very, very big gap. We felt that in addition to the very good and clear document that was made by the NEC of May the 2nd last year, which was spelling in very clear terms the position of the ANC vis-à-vis the women of South Africa as a whole, we felt we should try and put it into practice in whatever way possible. That is why we felt that we should try and put up this thing of making sure that at least when we elect our body, of the highest body of the ANC, we should bring up the women to about 30% of the leadership that is going to lead our men. And we thought this should be put in as an affirmative action.
If today it is suggested that a certain percentage of the people in the leadership of the ANC should get there not because of merit, but because they are men or because they are women, then it does away with the foundation of merit. Where is merit? The problem for us is this, that if tomorrow members of the ANC were to elect or women were to become the majority in the leadership of the ANC, probably the men will start saying there must be a percentage for them on the leadership of the ANC. It makes our position a bit ridiculous. Instead of perhaps beginning with affirmative action from the top, couldn't we begin to build it from below, in which we actually say within the branch committees, as a starting point, we would like to introduce some quota there.
Affirmative action should be taken at the top level and at grassroots level, because if we don't look at the top level, it will never be taken even at the grassroots level, because the laws that are made by men. At the present moment, this is what we see. And if we don't put in the 30% of women, are the men going to look at women's issues? I am sure that most of you will agree with me that if we accept that we are oppressed, we accept that we've been oppressed for a long period of time, then we've got to accept that affirmative action has to be taken.
I wish we would be honest, like one comrade was to us on the bus last night. When the question of 30% was mentioned, he got very furious and he said, and comrades, I think this may be at the bottom of it. In 1981, Comrade President said to the ANC Women's Section Conference, the responsibility of the emancipation of women is not a task of women alone, but it's a task of all of us. We are not arguing for the rights of women, for accelerated participation of women in all the structures, just for the sake of the women. It is for the sake of our organization. Let us be an exemplary ANC. Let us lead as we lead in the country, even on this question. When we start talking about merit, we must listen to ourselves, because we begin to sound very much like what many racists say about black people. Why don't they raise themselves up? Why don't they work themselves up? Why don't they qualify? Why is it as if we are responsible for this subordination of women in all spheres years of life. And finally, comrades, when we talk about women's emancipation, it's very curious how it becomes a joking matter, a laughing matter. We giggle as if it's not really about human beings who want to have the fullest expression in their own organization. Thank you, comrades.
Comrades, we judge you as ANC members, not as women. When we elect you as ANC members, not as women. We also wish that you can take part in the NEC, but as ANC members, not as women, and we'll elect you as ANC members. No guarantees.
I totally support the affirmative action. And Comrade Chair, I must say that the 30% will have to accept it as a movement so that we redress the issue of women today. In particular, the black women. I must say this.
You know, already in the past we've been accused of being a Xhosa-dominated organization, and we have been accused of being an African organization, and so on. So are we going to go about trying to redress or respond to these accusations by inserting people there? We are looking at nominations and nomination forms. We find that if the way branch is nominated and regions nominated, women and men did not do enough work to put women on the nomination list for the national exec. Even now, when you go through that nomination list, you find that of the 103 names for the non-specified positions, out of 103, 25 are women. That is not 30%. Already we're having problems meeting the target of the quota. So I'm saying that for now, let us leave it. Let us, like Comrade Taylor said, work very hard on the ground.
To be able to get the consensus of the entire conference, at least 30% I would say is too much. But I'll have a proposal to meet them halfway, 10%. And let me support that. I think it's important they be given a chance to prove themselves. After that, through merit, they could reach the 30, they could reach 50, they could reach 100%. But at least from top down, 10% is sufficient.
I'm most appalled to find that there are still so many male chauvinists. There are people who are talking about giving us 10%. That is absolutely ridiculous. You remind me of the most oppressive woman in the world, Margaret Thatcher, who said we gave only a little. And now you are also saying, let's give them only a little. We are the backbone of this movement. We are the women who have carried the men on our shoulders through the years for them to succeed in the struggle. So give us a little consideration.
If we deprive women of contributing to the future development of this country, then we are making ourselves poorer. We have remained in the ANC through thick and thin because we were proud of the record of the ANC for standing up to non-racialism, for standing up to all forms of equality. And now we hope that the ANC will continue in that glorious tradition of standing up on this difficult question of women and saying yes to the equality of women.
You have tolerated speakers by giving them a chance of speaking. And now there was a motion which is still standing, the motion of voting. I think both parties have to make a compromise because it's not a question of the winner takes it all. Let's compromise for the sake of progress. Thank you very much.
Comrades, the crisp issue at this stage is whether at this election there will be a minimum quota of 30% on the NEC of women. I think we should vote on that. One way or the other, we have really now had a very full debate, and let us vote on that question. The motion that in the formulation, in paragraph 2, subparagraph B, which says that the NEC shall be constituted as follows: 50 members of the NEC shall be elected by secret ballot by the National Conference, full stop. 30% of this number shall be women. It has been moved that the last sentence be deleted. 30% of this number shall be women. All in favor of deleting this last sentence, please show.
So that we can be able to look at this issue in as rational a way as we can possibly under the circumstances.
We don't think what has happened, maybe it was not necessary.
I propose that we ask the NEC, that our delegation puts it to the NEC, that they have to take a firm decision on the issue.
What we would like to suggest is that the conference should adjourn and give opportunity to the three national executives, that is of the ANC, the Women's League, and the Youth League, to sit together to hammer out a compromise. You are our highest court, and you are the people who decide. Whatever we will be doing, whatever decision we have reached, it can only work, it can only be implemented if you approve of it. If you reject it, we will accept that your decision. But we are asking you to give us the opportunity of trying to settle this matter in such a way that it should not play into the hands of our enemies.
It is important that we must make an observation that it's crucial that when an issue such as this one arises, the procedure by which we tackle it must not become a precedent which tomorrow will land us in deeper trouble. What happens tomorrow if an issue arises before conference and one of the regions, because it is not happy about how the other people feel, says it's not going to vote? Are we going to follow this procedure again? And how many times will we follow a procedure of that nature over and over? Because there is essentially something wrong. In discussing this issue, none of us discussed it with prejudice against the women's section of the movement. We discussed this issue with the prime view that the interests of the African National Congress must be protected as a movement together. But our comrades, having had a thorough share of the debate, when they lose an argument, they refuse to bow to the procedures of democracy. I am opposing that suggestion, comrades, on the simple basis that I think we are setting a precedent which is dangerous in the history of the movement.
This matter can only be resolved by the conference itself, by delegates. We are making no suggestion which infringes either directly or indirectly on that principle. But I hope those who are insisting that this matter must be decided by a vote are well aware of what is going to happen. If you are aware of what will happen, and you nevertheless insist on your right to decide the matter by vote, then of course you have the responsibility. I would also like to say of terror, we have been together in Robben Island. We have handled many sensitive problems without necessarily following the rules as to how things should be resolved. We have decided to address issues on the basis of what was required to be done in order to avoid a situation which can go out of hand. And this is not a matter that should be settled by votes. I would like to make an appeal to my friend, Tara, that please don't do anything, even though it's correct, you are within your right. Don't do anything which is going to make this matter to go out of hand. At least by trying to put forward a compromise, we are trying to resolve a very delicate situation.
Committee Chairperson, I'm really standing here to respond to the request which the Deputy President has made to us. And I want to start off by saying that this conference is a very important conference because it marks actually the beginning of a particular period. We are laying here now the foundations of practice in this organization for the future. That is the only reason that concerns me as to precedents which we said in this meeting will be referred to us again in future. But I think I'm sensitive to the fact that there are realities now with which we are faced with. And from the point of view of practical arrangements, possibilities of actually sorting out the problem is, if it can be sorted out that way, I'm prepared to withdraw the suggestion that we should not allow the NEC to handle this matter. But I want to underline the fact that it must not become practice in our work in this organization. Once we are at conference must decide issues here. All of us must be subject to democratic practice. We must accept it that way. Then we have a reliable foundation for the future.
I do, however, Comrade Chair, like to apologize very much to this House on behalf of the women and on behalf of
the Women's League withdrew the resolution, but conference fully accepted the principle of affirmative action, which must ensure the full and equal participation of women.
At this juncture.
We are Zulus. We are Zulus. Sure. Yes.
Despite the past peace initiatives within Qatar, and despite the machinery at the disposal of the security forces, many thousands of people have lost their lives as a result of the violence that has been raging in our country. Even during conference, some delegates' homes were attacked and family members killed. The Violence Commission met to formulate an adequate response to this counter-revolutionary war.
The violence, as we call it, is essentially a war against the people. And it's part of a very clear strategy, comrades, of low-intensity warfare that has actually been waged by the enemy, particularly in the mid-1980s, to try and destroy us. Once before February 2, 1990, it was very clear. The enemy was throwing us into prison, arrests, massive show trials, etc. After February 2, and with the lifting of the state of emergency and all that, the state is doing now is continuing that kind of war through different ways and through different mechanisms now. I think also what is important is that we must dispel the notion of a third force, as I have said, completely. The explanation of the third force is based on the premise that de Klerk is honest and he really wants to bring change, and it's only third undefinable forces that are otherwise undermining the very good intentions that de Klerk wants to do. And I think that has actually caused problems in terms of our own strategy as the ANC in terms of how we deal with the violence. Now, also about peace agreements is that because we signed the agreement with Inkatha on January 29, 1991, we tend to be very reluctant to actually expose what Inkatha is doing. And also we become very reluctant to analyze Inkatha for what it is. Let me give an example from the Natal Midlands, for instance, how Inkatha uses these peace agreements to try and hide its own atrocities against the people. They try to attack a particular area, and then the comrades are able to repel them, and then they go to the press and they actually say that the ANC has ambushed Inkatha people who were from a peace rally that was reporting back on the January 29 meeting. A very fine, nice story. When we start responding to the press and raising this, then we meet at the level of what is called the 12-a-side structure that was created between Inkatha and ourselves in January 29. Then they start saying, but why did you go to the press on this? Why did you go to the press on that? Because we should have not gone to the press, but just come and discuss this in this structure. So these structures for Inkatha, they want also to use them as a means to hide away its own atrocities. As if we expose what it is doing, then we are breaking the agreement. I think the one thing also that we'd like to talk about around peace agreements are local peace initiatives. That once local peace initiatives can actually help to contain the violence, but they can have the problem that Inkatha makes a peace agreement in one area, and then it uses that as a breather actually to attack the next area. And in some instances, this has caused problems because one branch of the ANC enters into an agreement with Inkatha, and Inkatha warlords from that area start attacking the adjacent branch. And then it starts creating problems within our own organizations. Now, in conclusion then, comrades, in terms of some of the issues that we need to be looking at, we need to be looking primarily really at a very serious program of action around which to end the violence, which then takes us to the question of mass action in relation to negotiations, and also looking specifically within that at much more forceful ways of putting our point across. Unless we develop a program of action to deal with the violence, we are going to flounder. Unless we do a very thorough self-criticism in the way that we have actually handled the violence, there are actually going to be problems. And also lastly, when we have resolved that there shall be defense units and that has not happened, we need at this commission to look very concretely, because that's not the only thing, but it's a very key part of our strategy of how do we ensure that those defense units are there. And those defense units should not be carrying stones or anything. We should also be carrying the very same sophisticated weaponry that the enemy is carrying.
Violence has been going on. December 1987, UDF and COSATU tried to find a solution to this violence by entering into agreements with Inkatha. Who reneged? It was not COSATU and UDF. Let us look at the role of the state. All those who were meeting to discuss the question of violence were rounded up and thrown behind bars into detention. People wanted peace, and it was a crime to seek peace. And the warlords continued with their work, with their carnage, with their massacre, with their murders. Then, what did we do after that? We entered into more peace agreements, peace initiatives. A very good thing, because every one of us wants peace. The fact that we call on the security forces to stop attacks on the people is because we want people to live peacefully. Because we want peace, we say the warlords must be arrested. because we want to pursue our activities peacefully. But we ever get that? We do not, because we have lost track of the essentials of our own revolution. That is the situation, Comrade Chairman. I only wish that those who are affected, who are involved in this violence, would be the people to discuss their own fate. What do they do? You mentioned the massacre, the so-called Gwashanga massacre, when in Qatar, loaded in buses, went there to attack the people. And the people gallantly defended themselves, killed more than 18 of the attackers, the warlords, and their men. What did our NEC say? We condemn the massacre. In other words, we're condemned for defending ourselves. I can assure this conference, when you talk of people who just talk war, the Natal Midlands, people who don't want peace. I was asked if I've ever gone to David Ntombela to shake hands with him. I'll be the last man to do that. Moy River, almost 4 weeks ago, David Ntombela was there conducting his armies, which murdered our people. Not a word from our own organization saying, here is the man of peace, because Ntombela is called now Peace Lord. As I'm speaking to you, he lives in a motel just next to Moy River, conducting operations there against our own people. They carry all assortment of weapons. But what do? We say it is violence, it's not a war of liberation on its low intensity. We say it's violence. Once you give it this description, once you give it this epithet, then what are you expected to do? You are expected to get all the priests with their Bibles to come and sing hosannas in order that there be peace on earth. You are not saying, here is a war of liberation, and the enemy is waging violent war on us. And therefore, we must not only call on our people as we do to defend themselves, but we must make it possible that they defend themselves. We always talk, defense committees, defend yourself. Is what? Yes, I was in Lusikisik one day, and the chairman of the branch there said, we don't want you to take sticks here and use them to defend yourselves because we are running short of firewood. We want those sticks to cook our food with. And he says we are running short of building material here because you take stones and use them for fighting. Therefore, houses and roads, get guns and defend yourselves. We talk about guns, we talk about MK. But you say, no, it's a crime. You'll pollute the atmosphere of negotiations.
We therefore resolve, 1, to support the current peace initiative of the church and business leaders in developing a code of conduct for the security forces, developing a code of conduct for the political organizations, developing an enforcement mechanism to monitor the codes that will involve a wide range of political groupings. Also developing a program of reconstruction. We resolve also to continue exploring ways of enabling our people to defend themselves and to take definite steps to provide all possible resources and assistance for the establishment of self-defense units in areas affected by the violence. Resolving also to embark on a program of national mass action within the context of our demands for for the removal of all obstacles to creating a climate for negotiations, and also within the context of our demands for the dismantling of all apartheid structures, and also within the context of our demands for an interim government and a constituent assembly. We resolve 4 to embark on a publicity campaign both locally and internationally to expose the true nature of the violence. To resolve, lastly, to establish structures on a branch, regional and national level with our partners within the Tripartite Alliance and other democratic formations to coordinate our strategies in responding to the violence.
In the entering into of peace pacts, it is the counter-revolutionary character of the organizations which we have entered into peace pacts with, namely Inkatha, has not been presented. Too often, Inkatha has been presented as a fraternal organization, and our resolution has to make it clear that Inkatha is not a fraternal organization of the African National Congress. I would like to insert a clause which says, all contacts with representatives of such counter-revolutionary forces as are mentioned in this resolution should be in a manner befitting such forces and be handled in such a way as to clearly show that we do not regard the instigators of violence as our friends or allies.
We of the rural areas, especially the Northern Transvaal, where most of these Bantu stands are located, are worried about the fact that it seems that the violence is being categorized as emanating from the IFP only. But it seems to us that every time that the so-called allies of ours in the Bantu stands, whenever they are from meeting our national NEC or from meeting with the RECs, they come up with some program of action against the very same members of the African National Congress. So it perturbs us to see that this thing is missing from the resolution. I wonder if something could be done about it in the resolution.
I don't think that it would be proper to simply just draft a resolution, present it to conference as if we have no other resolution when we have a resolution from the consultative conference. And also I thought it would be proper also to get some kind of report. I know that comrades normally say, well, you can't report openly on defense units. On the one hand, I accept that, but on the other hand, it can become a very handy excuse for not doing anything about this matter. And I think that it is very important that we do get some kind of feedback from the NEC as to what has been done about this particular matter, in order also to try and connect our resolution from the consultative conference and the resolution that we are likely to take from this particular conference. I think also in the resolution or this conference should look at the question of deadlines in terms of doing certain things, like this matter of defense units in particular, that we don't just say we will strive to do this and we don't give ourselves some kind of deadlines that such and such will have to be done by such and such a time. Thank you, Comrade Chair.
Already last December, the question of self-defense units was placed on our agenda. The problem is that that was not implemented. And here we are, more than 6 months later, with many bodies lying along the road, and our organization has done nothing to see to the establishment of the self-defense units. So we cannot expect and we cannot accept, comrades, that we must now go to see to the exploring of this question. The question of Isibam is one thing, and Comrade Harry has dealt with that. We here can't address it, comrades. But what we can address, what we must address immediately, is to go to our people and show them the way to organize the structures
at the community level, and those structures are of self-protection units. So, Comrade Chair, I'm saying that the ANC must take responsibility for the implementation of such a plan. Okay.
After taking into account the concerns of the delegates, the draft resolution on violence was adopted with a few amendments. The new National Executive Committee was elected after the performance of each candidate was put under the microscope at branch and regional levels. An independent electoral commission ensured that elections were free and fair and that they were properly conducted by secret ballot.
The persons who voted were all duly accredited delegates. The voting was conducted fairly and the ballot was secret. Counting was accurate. The Electoral Commission has reported that it is satisfied that free and fair elections were conducted for all positions, and the results which have been announced and which I will now announce are in accordance with the secret ballots that were conducted. As you know, yesterday you resolved unanimously to elect Comrade Oliver Tambo to the position of National Chairman of the ANC. There was only one candidate for the position of President. No ballot was necessary, and I accordingly take great pleasure in announcing the election of Comrade Nelson Mandela to the post of President.
Results of the 50 successful candidates.
and foremost, strategy and tactics, supposed to be a document that contains the broad guidelines of movement policy. It is not supposed to be a program of action, but should create a basis upon which programs of action can be developed on an ongoing basis. It is supposed to create or to indicate the broad parameters within which the day-to-day work of the movement can be conducted. Secondly, strategy and tactics is supposed to be a document that discusses the fundamental policy of the movement, which would then affect the deployment of resources within the movement. Thirdly, strategy and tactics is supposed to be relatively timeless. We cannot have a kind of strategy and tactics that becomes outdated in a week or in a year's time. That is why it has to be as broad as possible. And therefore, in our own discussion, we'll have to agree how timeless or what kind of time span is this strategy and tactics supposed to cover. And broadly, what is proposed in the draft, as you should know, is that it covers what broadly is called a period of transition. Lastly, people have stated over and over again that the situation in which we are is not completely irreversible. And therefore, there are possibilities that we might have to revert to forms of struggle that we were using in the past. And the question has always arisen, do we want in our strategy and tactics to elaborate on those forms of struggle that we might have to resort to? Or do those kinds of formulations belong somewhere else? We're talking now about the strengths and weaknesses of the liberation movement. The strategic goal that we pursue objectively serves the interests of the majority within society, promotes peace amongst the people, and that gives us the moral and political strength. And the path of peaceful transition that we have decided upon now enjoys the support of the overwhelming majority within society. Even amongst people who might disagree with the policies of the ANC, they believe that there should be peaceful political contest, free political activity. But we say that morality on its own does not shape the strength of an organization. In the final analysis, our power resides in the masses. They possess the means to bring pressure to bear on the ruling bloc, and if you give them skillful leadership, they're able to act effectively and ensure that we move forward as fast as possible. And we identify our weaknesses in the positive sense more as subjective weaknesses. The objective ones being in inverse as compared to the regime, we do not have the resources that it has. Be it financial, be it military, be it propaganda-wise and so on. We do not have those resources. But the subjective problems would arise from the question whether we're able to use our strength in order to ensure that we shift the balance of forces. This would entail the capacity to organize and mobilize the people, our ability to lead not only our members and supporters, but society as a whole. So that ultimately, it's a question of whether we're able subjectively to use our strengths. And if you have got the right to complain about lack of resources, this is not the cause of our major weakness. It simply compounds our weakness. The main cause is whether we're able to use our strength to our own advantage. We're saying also another strength of the state is that because the ruling class in its totality is united on their strategic perspective, then most elements, either wittingly or unwittingly, amongst these forces, avail their resources to the regime, especially during crisis moments. And therefore, you find them presenting almost a total united front against the democratic movement and the ANC in particular. But we are saying that it has got many, many weaknesses. The first one is that the apartheid system is in general crisis, political and economic, and the regime cannot deal with this crisis in its totality. Secondly, the regime craves for credibility amongst our people and internationally. And therefore, it wants to be seen to be negotiating and reaching agreements. And that constitutes another weakness on the part of the regime, which we can exploit. Thirdly, the regime in trying to form alliances within the black community, it finds itself having to identify with forces which are thoroughly discredited within their own communities. Fourthly, there are many forces which were schooled in anti-ANC propaganda before we were unbanned. But now that we are here, able to intervene directly, they are able from first-hand experience to make a rational choice. And this would, depending on what work we do, include elements within the security forces, Bantustan forces, and so on and so forth.
There are two extremes. At one level, there's a feeling that we should go on as we've been going on over the years. Struggle in an old way, so to say. And there's yet another extreme, which seeks to characterize the situation, to argue as if we're in a post-apartheid society. I think what needs to be done really is to properly characterize the situation as is and begin to give the overall direction. If you look, for instance, at the civic movement, which used to get direction from the movement in general terms, today is left in a limbo in a sense. They are seeking their own identity and a lot of confusion.
Comrade, I suggest that our strategic option has not as yet changed. Our strategic option is still the transfer of power to our people, to transform our society, which has all the contradictions of capitalism at the moment, into a society based on justice towards socialism. I think in broad terms that is our strategic objective. But what we do not need to lose sight of is the fact that the balance of forces both externally and internally have changed. And then in determining our tactics, we have got to take into consideration the alteration of forces externally, that is internationally, and nationally. That in doing so, we do not lose sight of the fact that all our successes, which we need to consolidate, have been the successes of our people. So that in essence, the masses of our people, whether internally or the mobilization of forces against apartheid South Africa externally, are the successes of our people.
I think there is some confusion about about the fact that we had previously spoken about the seizure of power, and we now talk predominantly about the transfer of power. I think there is confusion about whether it's just semantics, playing with words, or whether it's in fact indicative of the approach which has changed, and I think we need to clarify that in this discussion. Otherwise, in terms of ourselves, maybe first in terms of the state, I think what one clearly identifies is that the state will change its own objectives, its own tactics and its strategies, not only in relation to itself, but also in relation to us, to the liberation movement. And I want to posit the argument that in fact there has been a clear shift between Groote Schuur and Pretoria in terms of how the state related to us, where, to put it very crudely, during Groote Schuur there was an approach where they wanted to go for co-managing jointly with the ANC the period of transition because of our own organizational weaknesses and obviously their own interventions to weaken us even further. They have now deemed fit and necessary to in fact go for dividing the ANC, smashing the ANC, and in fact building something very separate in competition to the ANC. I think we need to understand what it is when we talk about the fact that circumstances have changed quite dramatically in our country. Can we say that we have entered into a period of transition? Does the changed circumstances in fact mean that we are in a transitionary phase? How does that definition of transition relate to questions of the obstacles? How does it relate to the question of the irreversibility of change? Because it affects things like the sanctions debate, it affects things like our attitude to interim governments, and I think that that's another issue which we have to clarify here in terms of our own perspective when we go back to the conference.
We need to be clear about the circumstances that we now operate in. Those circumstances say to us that we have not yet entered a period of transition. Transition must surely be related to the question of power in the hands of the people. The fundamental question of sovereignty. Where does sovereignty vest? And what is the point of transfer of sovereignty? And I want to suggest here, Comrade Chair, that the beginning of that process is the point of an interim government. And therefore, to talk about a period of transition now misses the point. You cannot have transition until there is a sense of the shift of power in a very real way, a shift of control and a shift of control over all of the forces and state apparatus.
Thank you, Comrade Chair. On the question of our strategic perspective, through struggle we have brought the regime almost to the point of a negotiating table. And it is our duty and responsibility to ensure that the process of negotiations continue in an uninterrupted manner. In pushing the negotiations forward, we rely not on our skill as negotiators, We rely not on propaganda alone, that what we would rely on at all times is our capacity to mobilize a mass uprising. That without that capacity, it is impossible for us to ensure that negotiations end up in a logical and satisfactory conclusion. I'm not saying that we need to relaunch or unsuspend the armed struggle. But what I'm saying nonetheless is that we need to nurture and build that capacity which we have been doing over the past 10 or 15 years. And that is the capacity to unleash a mass uprising. And such an uprising would not make sense if we are unable at all times to be able to inject an armed component into that mass uprising. And this requires of us to nurture all the pillars of our struggle, all 4 pillars of the struggle. We need to ensure that we have an army and that we build an army, not for the purposes of combat at this point in time, but for the purposes of injecting an armed component into a mass uprising if that is needed. Without that sort of capacity, there is no reason why the regime should not stall negotiations. There is no reason why the regime should not become intransigent on the question of a constituent assembly or any of the other key questions that face us.
I think, one, the situation demands, comrades, that we radically move because the conditions have altered. We move from the old concepts with regards to armed struggle, our perspective of armed struggle. I think we must move completely away from that formulation of 1969 Morocco struggle, a Morocco conference on strategy and tactics, and completely, this concept of a protracted struggle with rear bases outside and the possibility of comrades still entertaining some idea of returning to the bush. I think the movement has got to do a serious thinking on this question of how now do we see the new perspective, the role of military under these new conditions and the way forward. I'm discussing this question in relation to the statement which was made to this position that we are still a national liberation movement which is still committed to transfer of power. And it is very dangerous. It's fundamentally important for any national liberation movement committed to question of seizure of power to give serious attention to military questions.
The Strategy and Tactics Commission met under rather difficult conditions. Some 500 people took part. In spite of this large number, about 200 people contributed verbally, and many others gave written communications as to what they wanted in this final report. There was a very high level of contributions, consequent, I think, on the extensive discussions that there have been in preparation for the conference. In the short time available to us, it's not been possible to provide an elaborate document of the Morogoro type. We've not aimed at that, we've merely aimed at a resolution. Also, I think there would have been a bit more stirring ending, a bit more of threats towards the government and so forth if we had a bit more time.
leadership of the ANC at all levels. But in terms of its day-to-day operations, the command of MK will take full charge of those operations.
Comrade Chairman, we must raise the point that until now, a number of MK comrades have or do constitute part of the security of the offices of the ANC. But they do so with jungle knives. Shouldn't we add there that the NEC should engage the regime and secure the right for these comrades who act in these capacities to actually do so with recognized weaponry?
Terra, the task given to you from my side is to write that amendment as soon as possible and submit it to us.
My question is on the armed struggle suspended and not abandoned, and the MK protecting our people. But day to day, we have our people molested, killed in the trains, in the buses, in the houses. What protection and what assurance have we got from MK that we can go back to our people and say we have the protection and defense from the MK? Thank you, sir.
The problem of violence was discussed when the Violence Commission presented its report. There were allusions to the whole issue of self-defense units. I'm not going to give any assurance. It's part of our responsibility, together with the ANC and community organizations, to make sure that these self-defense units are organized as soon as possible.
Comrade Chair, I move that the paragraph should be deleted.
Yeah.
In my view, Comrade Chair, it is in direct violation of the spirit of the agreement of DF Malan, in which the ANC agreed that it will undertake a phased-out depletion of the underground structures. And it is my belief that at this stage of our struggle, the army's pivot and hinges on the underground. And this sentence, in light of the agreements existing now, seems to not make much sense to me.
Does anybody want to reply to that? Yes, Comrade Tenjua.
Our argument, Comrade Chair, is that the ANC and MK are unbanned, and therefore MK can have structures, recognized structures. And the second aspect is that within the movement, if MK does not have recognized structures, it cannot operate effectively. And therefore it needs, for the sake of operating effectively and for the sake of pursuing its program of action and the orders that we are going to receive from this conference, we need structures and offices. There is no implication of underground.
One of the most important obstacles to negotiation is the release of political prisoners. We have been handling this matter with the government since the first summit in May last year. As far as the political prisoners outside the homeless. There are 19 of them who were sentenced for murder. And the government took up the attitude that these could not be released because they fell outside the definition of a political prisoner, as was decided at Groote Schuur. We rejected that contention and pointed out that any offense which was politically motivated makes the person who committed that offense a political prisoner. The government has now accepted that position. Of the 19 political prisoners still remaining in terms of this definition, these prisoners were released today. This conference has reflected the shifts we have made in our own organization and the transformation from a banned illegal formation to a mass-based and democratic organization. And this conference has also reflected the amount of work we have to do to consolidate our policies amongst all the people in this country. We have achieved an important milestone in our history, and that is the merging of the different strands of our organization. Because of the enthusiasm that has been shown here, I do not consider it necessary to go into details about our achievements. But perhaps it is necessary for me just to say in very brief outline that the ANC in this country continues to hold the strategic initiative. And those people who say that the initiative has passed on to Mr. de Klerk are just giving vent to their own wishes. The government, during the last 40 years, has told the country and the world that the solution to the problems of this country was the policy of apartheid, in which blacks would continue to be hewers of wood and drawers of water. On the contrary, we announced a non-racial policy. We announced that we were and still are fighting for a democratic South Africa, molded on the principle of one person, one vote. The government has now admitted that they were wrong. We were right. Even on the question of sanctions, where they say sanctions are crumbling, that may be true, but they are exaggerating the matter. They do not tell us that the decision taken by the EEC in December last year to lift sanctions on gold coins coal and iron ore. Those sanctions cannot be implemented because of the decision of the Danish Parliament. And that decision, on the authority of Jacques Delors, the president of the EC, to whom I spoke about 3 weeks ago, on his authority, that decision cannot be carried out until the Danish Parliament changes its decision. In conclusion, comrades, we are very happy indeed to have had such a successful conference. We are happy about the contributions that you made, the criticism, the constructive criticisms that you have brought forward. The leadership must listen to the membership, because we are here to serve the membership and our people. But you must also listen to us. We want you to know that you yourselves, whether you are on the national executive or not, on the regional executive committee, on the branch executive committee or not, you, as a member of the ANC, are a leader in your own name and right. And it is in that spirit that we address you. It is in that spirit that we will listen to your criticism and your suggestions. And if you do that, there is no doubt that the road to union buildings and Dane Hayes has become all the shorter.
Participants of this 48th National Conference of the ANC, representing a cross-section of South African society, workers, students, the rural masses, intellectuals, religious communities, business persons, men and women, young and old, black and white, hereby adopt this declaration as our collective message to our country and to the world. This 48th National Conference of the ANC comes at a time when our country and its people are poised to commence the last leg of our long struggle to bring an end to minority domination and to usher in an era of democracy and peace. We reaffirm our unambiguous commitment to exploring every possible avenue to resolve by peaceful means the problems of our country. We note with alarm the continuation of vigilante violence perpetrated by agencies of the state against black communities. We refuse to submit to the temptations of despair induced by the enemies of democracy, justice and peace, who have over the past 18 months subjected our country to unprecedented level of violence and bloodletting with a view to derailing the search for peace and postponing indefinitely the establishment of a democratic, non-racial state. We remain committed to the call for an interim government and a constituent assembly elected on the basis of one person, one vote, on a non-racial voters' roll. We, together with a majority of South Africans, are committed to the advancement of the struggle within the context of the new situation. We are conscious of the heavy responsibility on the African National Congress and the people in general to ensure that this takes place with a minimum of bloodshed and destruction. We pledge to march together in ever-swelling ranks to a united, non-racial, non-sexist and democratic South Africa. Let peace, freedom and justice prevail.